In the gilded halls of the Kingdom of Valdoria, where centuries of tradition mask deadly secrets, two brothers stand on opposite sides of a scandal that threatens to topple the ancient crown. When Prince Adrian discovers his younger brother Prince Marcus hiding in the shadows of the old castle, what begins as a rescue mission becomes a desperate flight from a conspiracy that reaches the very heart of the royal bloodline. Some exiles are chosen, protocol. Others are hunted. And sometimes the only way to save a kingdom is to abandon it entirely. The rain hammered against the ancient stone walls of Valdoria Castle with the fury of 1,000 drums, each drop carrying the weight of secrets that had festered within these halls for generations. Prince Adrian Valdenmarch pressed his back against the cold granite pillar, his breath forming small clouds in the damp air as he strained to hear beyond the storm's chaos. The castle that had been his home for 32 years now felt like a trap, its familiar corridors transformed into a labyrinth of danger. 3 hours had passed since the emergency council meeting ended in disaster. 3 hours since his younger brother Prince Marcus had vanished without a trace. Inherited might cost him everything he held dear. The ornate clock in the great hall chimed midnight, its deep bronze tones, echoing through chambers where kings once held court and queens once danced. Now those same rooms buzzed with whispered conversations between men in dark suits who spoke in codes Adrian was only beginning to understand. The royal guard, once loyal protectors, had been replaced by faces he did not recognize. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every friend might be a traitor. Adrian adjusted the hood of his dark cloak and moved carefully along the servants' corridor, a passage he had explored as a curious child but never imagined he would use as a desperate man. The stones beneath his feet had been worn smooth by centuries of loyal servants who had served his family with honor. Tonight, those same stones might witness the end of the Valdenmarch dynasty. His mind raced back to the events that had shattered his world, the discovery of the documents in the royal archives, the accusations that followed, the emergency session where Lord Chancellor Blackwood had presented evidence that painted Marcus not as a wayward prince, but as something far more dangerous, a traitor to the crown, a conspirator against the very foundation of their kingdom. But Adrian knew his brother. Marcus was reckless, certainly, impulsive and often careless with protocol. Family. He gambled too much, trusted too easily, and had a talent for finding trouble in the most innocent situations. Yet beneath all his flaws, Marcus possessed something rare in royal circles, genuine compassion for the common people and an unwavering moral compass that sometimes put him at odds with political necessity. The accusations made no sense. Documents claiming Marcus had been feeding state secrets to the neighboring Republic of Astoria. Photographers, supposedly showing him in compromising meetings with known enemy agents. Financial records suggesting he had received payments for information about Valdoria's military defenses. Everything felt orchestrated, too convenient, too perfectly damning. Adrian paused at the intersection of two corridors, listening for footsteps. The castle's heating system groaned and whispered through the walls, creating a symphony of familiar sounds that usually brought comfort, but now seemed ominous. He did to reach the old wine cellars, where secret passages had been carved during the castle's construction 5 centuries ago. If Marcus was hiding anywhere in the castle, it would be there. The accusations against Marcus had not come from foreign intelligence services or captured enemy agents. They had emerged from within their own government, presented by Lord Chancellor Blackwood with the support of Defense Minister Cromwell and backed by what appeared to be irrefutable evidence. The same men who had served his father for 20 years were now calling for Marcus's immediate arrest and trial for high treason. Adrian had demanded to speak with his brother privately before any official action was taken. It was his right as crown prince, and even Blackwood could not deny such a request without raising questions about his own authority. But when the guards went to Marcus's chambers, they found them empty. His brother had vanished as if he had never existed, leaving behind only questions and the growing certainty that something far more complex was unfolding than a simple case of royal betrayal. The old wine cellar lay 3 levels beneath the main castle structure, accessible through a narrow stone staircase that had been hidden behind a false wall in the kitchen pantry. Adrian had discovered it during childhood adventures with Marcus, when they pretended to be knights escaping from enemy castles. The irony was not lost on him that those childhood games had become terrifying reality. As he descended the worn stone steps, The air grew colder and heavy with the scent of aged wine and damp earth. The cellars had been carved directly into the bedrock beneath the castle, creating a network of chambers and tunnels that extended far beyond what appeared on any official castle blueprint. His ancestors had been wise to include such hidden spaces, though they could never have imagined they would be needed to protect the royal family from its own government. The first chamber contained row upon row of wine racks, their bottles covered in decades of dust and cobwebs. Adrian pulled out his phone and activated its flashlight, casting dancing shadows across the ancient walls. The light revealed something that made his heart race. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading deeper into the cellar complex. Prints, each one larger than the last. The footprints were definitely recent, made by someone wearing the soft-soled boots favored by the royal family for informal occasions. Marcus had been here, and recently. The trail led to the deepest chamber where the wine racks gave way to old storage areas filled with forgotten furniture and artifacts from previous generations. Adrian swept his light across the space and froze. There, huddled behind an overturned dining table from the previous century, was a figure in dark clothing. Marcus? The figure raised its head, and Adrian saw his brother's familiar face, pale and drawn with exhaustion but unmistakably alive. Marcus's usually perfect hair was disheveled, his royal bearing replaced by the hunched posture of a hunted man. Adrian, Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. You shouldn't be here. If they find you with me, they're going to find you anyway if you stay here much longer. Adrian knelt beside his brother, studying the fear in eyes that had always sparkled with mischief and joy. We need to get you out of the castle. Tonight. Marcus shook his head slowly. You don't understand. This isn't just about me. The documents they found, the evidence against me, it's all fake, but it's not random. Someone is using me to get to you. What do you mean? I've been investigating irregularities in the defense contracts, Adrian. Millions of pounds worth of payments to companies that don't seem to exist. When I started asking questions, suddenly these documents appeared in the archives with my supposed signature on them. Marcus pulled a folded paper from his jacket. But look at this. I found it hidden in Blackwood's private office. Adrian took the document and examined it under his phone's light. It was a communication between Lord Chancellor Blackwood and someone identified only as the architect, discussing the timeline for removing both princes from the line of succession. The language was careful, but the intent was clear. Marcus would be discredited through scandal, and Adrian would be eliminated through means that were described only as permanent solutions to temporary problems. They're planning a coup, Marcus continued. Father's illness has made him increasingly dependent on Blackwood's counsel. But Blackwood isn't content to be the power behind the throne. He wants the throne itself, and he has allies within the military and intelligence services. Adrian felt the weight of understanding settle upon him like a physical burden. The accusations against Marcus were not the main event. They were the opening move in a larger strategy designed to clear the path to power for men who had sworn oaths of loyalty to the crown, but had always served their own ambitions. We need proof, Adrian said. Something more than stolen documents that could be dismissed as forgeries. I have proof. Audio recordings from Blackwood's office, financial records showing the false flag operations, even photographs of the meetings where they planned this. Marcus gestured toward a leather satchel hidden beneath the old furniture. But they know I have it, which is why they move so quickly with the treason charges. If they can arrest me for treason, anything I say will be dismissed as the desperate lies of a convicted traitor. The sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere above them, followed by voices calling orders in tones that suggested urgency and authority. The guards were conducting a systematic search of the castle, and it was only a matter of time before they discovered the entrance to the cellars. There's another way out, Marcus said, reading the concern in Adrian's expression. The old escape tunnel that leads to the river. But Adrian, if I run, they'll use my flight as proof of guilt. They'll say I fled because I couldn't face justice. If you stay, they'll make sure you never get the chance to present your evidence. Adrian replied firmly. Dead traitors tell no tales. Inconvenient accidents happen to inconvenient prisoners. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the truth in his brother's words. They gathered the evidence and moved deeper into the cellar complex, following passages that their ancestors had designed for exactly this purpose. though those earlier builders had probably imagined foreign invaders rather than domestic betrayers. The escape tunnel was narrow and partially flooded from decades of neglect, but it remained passable. As they waded through knee-deep water toward the distant sound of the river, Adrian's mind was already working on the next phase of their survival. They could not simply run and hide. The evidence Marcus had gathered was valuable, but it would be meaningless unless they could find a way to present it to people who had the power and integrity to act upon it. "Where can we go?" Marcus asked as they approached the tunnel's exit near the riverbank. "Blackwood has allies throughout the government, and the neighboring kingdoms won't want to harbor fugitive royalty." Adrian had been considering the same question, weighing options that all seemed equally dangerous, and he remembered something from his military training years earlier, when he had served briefly with special forces before returning to his royal duties. Captain Sarah Morrison, his former commanding officer, who now worked in military intelligence, but had always maintained that her loyalty was to the kingdom rather than to any individual leader. "I know someone who might help," he said. "But first, we need to get as far from the castle as possible. They'll have tracking dogs and thermal imaging equipment within the hour." They emerged from the tunnel into the storm, where the rain immediately soaked through their clothing and the wind threatened to knock them from their feet. The river was running high and fast, swollen by the same storm that had provided cover for their escape. On the opposite bank, the lights of Valdoria City twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing lives that would be affected by the conspiracy they had uncovered. Adrian looked back at the castle that had been his home and his prison, its illuminated windows casting golden rectangles across the dark landscape. Somewhere within those walls, his father lay sleeping, unaware that the men he trusted were orchestrating the destruction of everything the Waldenmarch family had built over 5 centuries. "We'll be back," Adrian promised, though he was not certain whether he was speaking to Marcus or to himself. "We'll expose the truth and reclaim what was stolen from us." Marcus placed his hand on Adrian's shoulder, and for a moment they stood together in the rain, 2 brothers united against a threat that was far greater than either of them had imagined when they woke up that morning. "Whatever happens," Marcus said, "I'm grateful you believed in me." "Family believes in family," Adrian replied. "Now let's go prove that the crown belongs to those who would die to protect it, not to those who would kill to possess it." They turned their backs on the castle and began their journey into exile, carrying with them the evidence that could save their kingdom and the determination to see justice done no matter the cost to themselves. The storm raged on, washing away their footprints and providing cover for their escape, while behind them the ancient walls of Valdoria Castle stood as silent witnesses to the beginning of what would become either the restoration of rightful rule or the final chapter in the history of a royal dynasty that had endured for 500 years. The game had begun, and there could be only one victor. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Valdoria City smelled of rust and forgotten dreams, its broken windows allowing the pre-dawn wind to whistle through the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving textile factory. Adrian crouched behind a stack of rotting wooden crates, his eyes fixed on the entrance while Marcus sorted through the evidence they had carried from the castle. 24 hours had passed since their escape. 24 hours of moving through shadows and avoiding the increasing number of search patrols that combed the countryside with methodical precision. In process, Captain Sarah Morrison arrived precisely at the appointed time, her footsteps echoing across the empty concrete floor with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. He described Justice weathered, closed dark jeans, a weathered leather jacket, and boots designed for quick movement, but her bearing remained unmistakably military. When she spotted Adrian emerging from his hiding place, her expression showed no surprise, only the calculating assessment of a professional evaluating an unexpected tactical situation. "Your Highness," she said formally, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, Adrian. When someone from your background contacts me through emergency channels and requests a meeting in an abandoned warehouse, I prepare for the worst possible scenarios. Security is exactly what we're dealing with," Adrian replied, gesturing for Marcus to join them. "Sarah, you remember my brother Marcus from the military exercises 3 years ago?" Sarah studied Marcus with the same careful attention she had given Adrian, noting his disheveled appearance and the tension that radiated from his posture. "The prince who's supposedly wanted for treason against the crown. The one whose photograph has been distributed to every law enforcement agency in the kingdom?" The same prince who has evidence that the treason charges are part of a larger conspiracy to overthrow our father and seize control of the government, Marcus said, opening the leather satchel and spreading documents across the dusty floor. For the next hour, Sarah examined the evidence, while Adrian and Marcus took turns explaining how they had uncovered the plot. The audio recordings were particularly damning, featuring clear voices discussing the timeline for eliminating the royal family and the financial incentives being offered to key military commanders who would support the transition to a new government structure. This is extensive, Sarah admitted, photographing each document with a secure camera designed to prevent digital interception. The financial trail alone shows coordination between Lord Chancellor Blackwood, Defense Minister Cromwell, and at least 12 high-ranking military officers, but the problem isn't the quality of your evidence. It's finding someone with the authority and courage to act on it. What do you mean? Adrian asked. The conspiracy reaches deep into the intelligence services and military command structure. Traditional channels of communication have been compromised, which means we can't trust normal procedures for reporting treasonous activity. If we approach the wrong person, we'll be walking into a trap. Populace? Marcus leaned forward, his voice urgent. There must be someone. Not everyone in the government can be part of this. You're right, Sarah agreed. But identifying the clean players from the corrupted ones will take time. We may not have. The search for you is intensifying, and I've heard rumors about orders being issued for capture by any means necessary, which usually translates to shoot on sight. Adrian felt the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders as he realized their situation required decisions that would affect not only their survival, but the future of the kingdom itself. What would you recommend? Short term, we need to get you both out of the country until we can identify trustworthy allies within the government. I have contacts in the neighboring Republic of Astoria who could provide temporary sanctuary while we work on exposing the conspiracy. Astoria? Marcus shook his head. That's exactly where Blackwood claims I've been selling state secrets. If we flee to Astoria, it will appear to confirm every accusation against me. Sometimes appearances matter less than survival, Sarah replied pragmatically. Dead princes can't clear their names or save their kingdom. The debate was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching the warehouse, their engines rumbling with the distinctive tone of military transport trucks. Sarah immediately moved to the broken window and peered through the grimy glass, her expression grim as she counted the approaching forces. 4 trucks, approximately 30 soldiers, and what appears to be a mobile command unit. Someone reported our location. She turned back to Adrian and Marcus, her voice calm despite the urgency of their situation. There's a service tunnel that connects this building to the old subway system. It's our only way out. They gathered the evidence hastily, while Sarah led them toward the back of the warehouse, where a rusted metal grate covered an opening that had once provided access for maintenance workers. The sound of boots on concrete echoed through the building as soldiers surrounded the perimeter and began their methodical search pattern. The service tunnel was cramped and dark, forcing them to move in single file through a space that reeked of stagnant water and decay. Behind them, the warehouse filled with voices shouting orders, and the harsh glare of military flashlights sweeping through the shadows where they had been hiding moments before. How did they find us? Marcus whispered as they crawled through the tunnel toward the abandoned subway station. Dirty Sarah replied quietly. Electronic surveillance, informants, or simple bad luck. The important thing now is reaching safe ground before they expand their search perimeter. The old subway tunnel had been abandoned for decades, its tracks removed, and its platforms converted into unofficial shelters for the homeless population of Valdoria City. As they emerged from the service tunnel, Adrian was struck by the sight of families huddled around makeshift fires, their possessions gathered into bundles that could be moved quickly if authorities arrived to evict them. These were his people, citizens of the kingdom he was supposed to inherit and protect. They looked up as the 3 fugitives passed through their temporary sanctuary, their faces showing no recognition, but offering the universal acknowledgement that existed between people who understood what it meant to be hunted and displaced. An elderly woman approached them as they paused to get their bearings. She wore layers of mismatched clothing and carried herself with the dignity of someone who had learned to survive in circumstances beyond her control. You're running from something, she observed, her voice carrying the wisdom of experience. The police were here an hour ago, asking questions about strangers. They showed photographs. Adrian realized she had recognized them but was choosing to offer help rather than turn them in for whatever reward had been offered. Thank you for the warning. The tunnels connect to the freight rail system about 2 miles east, the woman continued. There's a train that leaves for the border at dawn, carries mostly agricultural equipment and seasonal workers. The guards are less careful about checking cargo manifests on those runs. Sarah nodded gratefully and pulled several bills from her wallet, pressing them into the woman's hands despite her protests. Appearance, for your kindness and your discretion. As they moved deeper into the tunnel system, following directions provided by people who had learned to navigate the hidden spaces beneath the city, Adrian found himself thinking about the contrast between the loyalty shown by homeless citizens and the betrayal perpetrated by men who had sworn oaths to protect the crown. The freight yards occupied several square miles on the eastern edge of Valdoria City, a maze of rail lines and warehouses where goods from across the kingdom were sorted and transported to destinations throughout the continent. The agricultural train sat on a sidetrack, its cargo cars partially loaded with farm equipment bound for markets in neighboring countries. There, Sarah pointed toward a car that contained large pieces of harvesting machinery, creating spaces where people could hide during the journey. If we can get aboard without being seen, that train will cross the border in approximately 6 hours. Marcus studied the rail yard, noting the patrol patterns of the security guards and the locations of surveillance cameras. It's going to be risky if they catch us attempting to cross the border illegally. It will confirm every accusation about our guilt. The alternative is staying here and hoping we can survive long enough to find someone willing to listen to our evidence, Adrian replied. Given what we've learned about the extent of this conspiracy, I'm not optimistic about our chances. They waited until the guards completed their patrol circuit, then moved quickly across the open ground toward the freight train. The security. The cargo car they had selected contained several large combines and tractors, their bulk creating shadowy spaces perfect for concealment during the border crossing. As they settled into their hiding places among the agricultural machinery, Adrian reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just 2 days. He had awakened in a royal bed with servants attending to his needs and advisors briefing him on affairs of state. Now he crouched in a freight car like a common criminal, fleeing the kingdom he had been born to rule. The train lurched into motion just as the sun appeared above the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Adrian of the Valdenmarch family colors. As Valdoria City receded behind them, he made a silent promise that he would return to reclaim what had been stolen, not just for his family but for all the citizens who deserved a government that served their interests rather than exploiting their loyalty. What's our next move once we cross the border? Marcus asked as the train gathered speed. We find allies, Adrian replied. People who understand that a successful conspiracy in Valdoria could destabilize the entire region. The neighboring kingdoms have as much interest in preventing Blackwood's coup as we do. Nations, using a device that looked like an ordinary smartphone, but was actually military-grade surveillance equipment. I'm picking up increased chatter about border security measures. They're implementing enhanced screening protocols at all crossing points. Because they know we're trying to leave the country, Marcus concluded, or because they want to make it appear that dangerous criminals are fleeing justice, Adrian corrected. Every security measure they implement reinforces their narrative about our guilt. The train continued eastward through countryside that Adrian had known all his life but was now seeing from the perspective of an exile, parts where loyal subjects worked to feed the kingdom. Villages where children played in streets that might soon see the march of soldiers, serving a government that had seized power through treachery rather than earning it through service. As they approached the border, the train began to slow, and they could hear the voices of customs officials preparing to conduct their routine inspection of cargo manifests and documentation. This would be their most dangerous moment, when discovery would mean not only capture, but probable death, disguised as resistance to arrest. Whatever happens, Adrian whispered to his brother, remember that the evidence we carry is more important than our individual survival. Someone needs to tell this story. Marcus nodded, gripping the leather satchel that contained proof of the conspiracy against their family and their kingdom. The truth will survive even if we don't. The train came to a complete stop, and they heard footsteps approaching their car as border guards began their systematic search of the cargo. Adrian closed his eyes and thought of his father, sleeping peacefully in the castle while the men he trusted prepared to complete their betrayal. Soon, very soon, the truth would emerge, and justice would be served to those who had chosen ambition over honor. The game continued, but the stakes had never been higher. The safe house in the Asturian capital of Millbrook was a modest two-story building nestled between a bakery and a used bookstore, its unremarkable facade designed to blend seamlessly into the urban landscape of a working-class neighborhood. Passed, since their dramatic border crossing, 3 weeks of careful planning and quiet investigation as they worked to build a network of allies capable of challenging the conspiracy that had stolen their kingdom. Adrian stood at the window of their temporary headquarters, watching morning commuters hurry past on their way to ordinary jobs that seemed impossibly peaceful compared to the deadly game of political chess he now found himself playing. The irony was not lost on him that he was seeking sanctuary in the very country where Marcus had allegedly committed treason, but Astoria's intelligence services had proven surprisingly receptive to their evidence once Sarah's military contacts had facilitated the initial introductions. Colonel Elena Vasquez of Asturian intelligence had spent the past week analyzing the documents they had brought from Valdoria, cross-referencing the financial records with her agency's knowledge of regional security threats. Her assessment had been both encouraging and sobering. The conspiracy was real and extensive, but dismantling it would require careful coordination between multiple intelligence agencies and flawless timing to prevent Blackwood from implementing contingency plans that could plunge the region into chaos. The communications intercepts are particularly valuable, Colonel Vasquez explained as she spread new intelligence reports across the table in their improvised command center. Your recordings have allowed us to identify the encryption codes being used by the conspirators, which means we can now monitor their ongoing operations in real time. Marcus leaned forward to study the latest intercepts, his expression growing increasingly grim as he read the translated communications between Lord Chancellor Blackwood and his network of collaborators. They're accelerating their timeline. The original plan called for a gradual transition of power over 6 months, but these messages suggest they're preparing to move within the next 2 weeks. What's driving the urgency? Adrian asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Your escape, Sarah replied bluntly. The fact that you're alive and free represents an existential threat to their entire operation. As long as you exist, there's always the possibility that you could return with evidence and loyal supporters to reclaim the throne. Colonel Vasquez nodded in agreement. Our analysts believe they're planning something called Operation Final Crown, a coordinated series of actions designed to eliminate all remaining obstacles to Blackwood's assumption of power. According to these intercepts, it includes your father's abdication under duress, the formal declaration of your deaths in exile, and the installation of a Regency Council with Blackwood as its permanent chairman. Adrian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. They're going to force my father to renounce the throne and declare us dead? Worse than that, Marcus said quietly, reading from one of the decoded messages. They're planning to stage our deaths. Photographs, witness testimony, even DNA evidence planted at a supposed accident scene. Once we're officially dead, there can be no legal challenge to Blackwood's authority. The weight of their situation settled over the room like a physical presence. They were not simply fighting to clear their names or reclaim their inheritance. They were racing against a deadline that would make their actual deaths irrelevant, because their legal deaths would be sufficient to secure Blackwood's position.
How long do we have, Adrian asked?
Based on the timeline referenced in these communications, Operation Final Crown is scheduled to begin in 8 days, Colonel Vasquez replied. Which means we have approximately 1 week to either expose the conspiracy or mount a counter-operation to prevent it. Sarah had been studying satellite photographs of Valdoria Castle and the surrounding military installations, analyzing the security arrangements that now protected the conspirators. The problem is access. Blackwood has replaced most of the traditional royal guard with his own loyalists, and the castle is effectively under siege conditions. Getting close enough to extract your father or confront the conspirators directly would require a major military operation. What about a smaller, more targeted approach, Marcus suggested? If we can't reach our father directly, maybe we can reach the people who still believe in the legitimate government. Colonel Vasquez looked up from her intelligence reports with interest. What do you have in mind? Public exposure, Marcus continued. Instead of trying to work through official channels that have been compromised, we broadcast the evidence directly to the people of Valdoria. Social media, underground networks, international news outlets, everywhere at once so they can't suppress or discredit it. In that base of sacred to tackle official denials and counter-narratives, Sarah pointed out. Blackwood's people have had weeks to prepare explanations for any accusations that might emerge. Adrian had been thinking about the same challenge, weighing the strengths and weaknesses of their position. The evidence is strong, but evidence alone won't be enough. We need something more dramatic, something that forces people to choose sides immediately, rather than waiting to see which way the political winds blow. Like what? Colonel Vasquez asked. Like the legitimate heir to the throne appearing in person to reclaim his birthright. Adrian replied, his voice carrying a determination that surprised even himself. He publicly broadcast live so they can't claim it's fake and challenge Blackwood directly. It forces everyone to make a choice. Support the conspiracy or support the crown. Marcus stared at his brother with a mixture of admiration and horror. Adrian, that's suicide. The moment you set foot in Valdoria, they'll kill you. There won't be any dramatic confrontation or public debate, just an immediate elimination of the threat you represent. Not if we do it right, Adrian countered. Not if we coordinate the timing with the evidence release and make it impossible for them to silence us without confirming everything we've accused them of. Colonel Vasquez was already running calculations in her mind, evaluating the tactical and political implications of such a bold strategy. It's extremely dangerous, but it might work. If we can get you into the country undetected and position you for a public appearance that's broadcast internationally, Blackwood would face an impossible choice between allowing you to speak and committing obvious assassination in front of witnesses. There's another element to consider, Sarah added. Military loyalty. Many of the officers serving under Cromwell are career soldiers who swore oaths to defend the crown. If they see the legitimate prince challenging the conspirators directly, some of them might remember where their true loyalty lies. The room fell silent as they contemplated the magnitude of what Adrian was proposing. It required perfect execution and extraordinary courage, with failure meaning not only their deaths but the permanent success of Blackwood's coup. I need to know that everyone understands the risks, Adrian said finally. This isn't just dangerous for me. It puts all of you in immediate peril as well. Anyone who helps me return to Valdoria becomes a target for elimination. With respect, Your Highness, Colonel Vasquez replied formally, some things are more important than personal safety. The stability of this entire region depends on preventing successful coups that could inspire similar actions in other kingdoms. Astoria has a vested interest in supporting legitimate governments. Marcus stood and walked to the window, staring out at the peaceful street scene while struggling with the knowledge that his brother was planning what amounted to a suicide mission. There has to be another way. Some strategy that doesn't require you to walk directly into Blackwood's trap. Every strategy we've discussed requires someone to take enormous risks, Adrian replied gently. The difference is that this approach puts the risk on the person who has the most to gain from success and the most to lose from failure. Over the next several hours, they developed the operational framework for what they began calling Return of the King, a coordinated assault on Blackwood's conspiracy that combined evidence disclosure, international pressure, and Adrian's dramatic return to challenge the usurpers directly. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution across multiple fronts. Colonel Vasquez would coordinate with international intelligence agencies to ensure the evidence was released simultaneously across multiple platforms, making suppression impossible. Sarah would infiltrate Valdoria ahead of Adrian's return, working to identify military units and government officials who remain loyal to the crown. Meanwhile, Marcus would serve as the backup communication hub, maintaining contact with their allies and ready to continue the operation if Adrian was captured or killed. The key is choosing the right moment and location for your return, Colonel Vasquez explained as they studied maps of Valdoria's major cities. It needs to be somewhere public enough that they can't simply make you disappear, but secure enough that you can actually deliver your message before they react. What about the Royal Cathedral? Marcus suggested. Sunday morning service is broadcast live throughout the kingdom, and it's traditionally considered neutral ground where even political enemies can seek sanctuary. Adrian studied the suggestion with growing excitement. The Royal Cathedral held deep symbolic significance for the people of Valdoria, and its traditional role as a place of sanctuary was enshrined in centuries of legal precedent. More importantly, the Sunday morning service was broadcast live to every corner of the kingdom, providing an audience that Blackwood couldn't control or eliminate. It's perfect, he agreed. but we'll need to coordinate with cathedral officials to ensure they're prepared for what's coming. If they're not willing to provide sanctuary, the whole plan collapses. Leave that to me, Sarah said. I have contacts within the church hierarchy who've been asking questions about the recent changes in government policy. They're not happy with Blackwood's attempts to reduce the church's traditional independence. As evening approached, their planning session transformed into something that felt almost like a war council, with maps and intelligence reports covering every available surface and communications equipment providing real-time updates from their growing network of allies within Baldoria. Adrian looked around the room at the people who had risked everything to help him reclaim his birthright and protect his kingdom. Colonel Vasquez, who could have simply refused to request for asylum, but had instead committed her entire organization to supporting their cause. Sarah, whose military career would be destroyed if their operation failed, but who had never hesitated to provide assistance, and Marcus, who had already sacrificed his reputation and safety to uncover the truth about the conspiracy. Adrian said quietly, I want all of you to know that your courage and loyalty have reminded me why the crown is worth fighting for. Not because of the power it represents, but because of the people it allows us to serve and protect. Marcus clasped his brother's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. Father always said that kingship was about sacrifice rather than privilege. You proving him right. The preparations continued late into the night as they refined every detail of their plan and established backup procedures for each possible contingency. In 7 days, Adrian would either reclaim his throne or die in the attempt, but either way the truth would emerge and the people of Aldoria would finally understand what had been done in their name. The final act was about to begin. The midnight crossing at the Valdoria-Astoria border was accomplished with the precision of a military operation, but the emotional weight of returning to his homeland after 3 weeks of exile hit Adrian with unexpected force. As he crouched in the cargo compartment of a supply truck driven by one of Sarah's contacts, breathing air that carried the familiar scent of Valdorian pine forests, he felt the full magnitude of what he was attempting settle upon him like a physical burden. Sarah rode in the passenger seat, her identification documents identifying her as a freelance journalist covering agricultural trade between the two nations. Her actual mission was far more complex. She would spend the next 4 days moving through the kingdom, making contact with military officers and government officials whose loyalty to the crown remained intact despite weeks of pressure from Blackwood's administration. The truck driver was Captain James Rothwell, a former Royal Guard who had been quietly dismissed from service after raising questions about the new security protocols being implemented at the castle. His dismissal had been presented as routine reorganization, but he understood its true meaning and had been waiting for an opportunity to serve his rightful king once again. This situation has deteriorated significantly since your departure, Captain Rothwell reported as they drove through the sleeping countryside toward their first safe house. Lord Chancellor Blackwood has convinced Parliament to grant him emergency powers to deal with the ongoing security crisis caused by your supposed treason. He now has the authority to detain anyone suspected of supporting the royal family without trial. Adrian absorbed this information with growing concern. How many people have been detained? Approximately 200 according to unofficial counts. Sarah replied, consulting notes she had compiled from intelligence reports. They include several members of Parliament who questioned the evidence against you, 3 high-ranking military officers who refused to swear personal loyalty oaths to Blackwood, and about 30 civilians whose only crime was expressing support for your father publicly. The scale of the crackdown was far beyond what Adrian had imagined when they planned his return. Blackwood was not simply consolidating power, he was systematically eliminating anyone who might oppose his rule or provide assistance to the legitimate royal family. What about my father? Have you been able to confirm his condition? Captain Rothwell's expression grew troubled. His Majesty has not been seen publicly since the day after your escape. The official statements claim he is suffering from exhaustion and is receiving medical treatment at the castle, but staff members who have been dismissed report that he appears heavily sedated whenever they've seen him. The implications were clear and terrifying. Blackwood was keeping the king incapacitated, while preparing to force his abdication under circumstances that would appear voluntary, but were actually coercive. Once that abdication was secured, there would be no legal barrier to Blackwood's assumption of complete authority over the kingdom. They spent the remainder of the night traveling through back roads and forest paths that Captain Rothwell knew from his years of Royal Guard service. The safe house they reached before dawn was a hunting lodge that had belonged to the royal family for generations, but had been sold to a trusted friend years earlier to raise funds for charitable activities. The new owner, Lord Edmund Fairfax, had maintained the property as a private retreat, while secretly keeping it available for royal use if needed. Lord Fairfax was waiting for them when they arrived, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by the serious expression of a man who understood the gravity of the situation. He was one of the few nobles who had openly questioned Blackwood's actions in Parliament before being subjected to investigation for potential sympathies with treasonous elements.
"Your Highness," Lord Fairfax said formally, then caught himself and smiled. "Adrian, it's good to see you alive and safe."
The official reports claimed you had been killed attempting to cross the border, but those of us who know you personally never believed such stories. Thank you for providing sanctuary, Adrian replied, and thank you for maintaining your opposition to Blackwood despite the personal cost. The cost of opposing him is nothing compared to the cost of allowing him to succeed, Lord Fairfax responded firmly. I've been in contact with other nobles and parliamentary members who share our concerns. We represent a minority, but we're not as isolated as Blackwood believes. Over the next several hours, as they rested and prepared for the challenges ahead, Adrian learned more about the resistance that was forming among the traditional power structures of Valdoria. Military officers who had served his family for decades were quietly organizing cells of loyal soldiers. Church officials were preparing to challenge Blackwood's attempts to control religious institutions. Even some members of the merchant class were beginning to question the economic policies being implemented by the new administration. The problem is coordination, Sarah explained as she analyzed intelligence reports that had been gathered by their growing network of allies. They court independently, which makes them vulnerable to discovery and elimination. They need central leadership and a coordinated strategy. They need their rightful king, Adrian said simply. At the cathedral is so crucial. It's not just about exposing the conspiracy. It's about providing a rallying point for everyone who still believes in legitimate government. Marcus contacted them through encrypted communication channels, reporting that the international evidence release was proceeding according to schedule. News outlets in 12 countries would simultaneously publish the financial records, audio recordings, and documented proof of Blackwood's conspiracy at precisely 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, 30 minutes before Adrian's planned appearance at the cathedral. Passes during their secure video conference. If the evidence is released too early, Blackwood will have time to prepare counter-narratives and security responses. But if it's released too late, your appearance won't have the supporting documentation to give it credibility. What about international reaction? Adrian asked. Colonel Vasquez reports that Astoria will formally recognize you as the legitimate ruler of Valdoria immediately following your public statement. The European Union has prepared a statement condemning Blackwood's usurpation of legitimate government, and 3 neighboring kingdoms have indicated they will refuse to recognize any government that comes to power through force rather than legal succession. The international pressure would be valuable, but Adrian knew that ultimately the fate of his kingdom would be determined by its own people and institutions rather than by foreign governments. If the citizens of Valdoria and the military forces sworn to protect them chose to support Blackwood's rule, no amount of international condemnation would restore the rightful monarchy. On Saturday evening, less than 12 hours before his planned appearance at the cathedral, Adrian received disturbing news from Captain Rothwell's contacts within the castle staff. His father had been moved from his private chambers to the medical wing, where he was being attended by doctors who had been brought in from outside the kingdom rather than the royal physicians who had served the family for years. They're accelerating their timelines, Sarah concluded after analyzing the reports. Something has made them decide to move faster than originally planned. It's the intelligence leaks, Adrian realized. They know we've been monitoring their communications, which means they know we're planning something. They're trying to complete the coup before we can act. Lord Fairfax had been monitoring news broadcasts throughout the evening, watching for any indication that Blackwood was preparing to announce major developments. There are rumors of a special parliamentary session being called for Monday morning, with an agenda that hasn't been publicly disclosed. The abdication ceremony, Adrian concluded grimly. They're going to force my father to abdicate on Monday, which means tomorrow is our last chance to act. The weight of that realization settled over everyone in the room. Their carefully planned operation, which had been designed around a specific timeline and sequence of events, would now need to be executed under emergency conditions with less preparation and higher risk than they had anticipated. "Can we still proceed with the cathedral plan?" Sarah asked. "We have to," Adrian replied. "This is an opportunity to reach the people directly before Blackwood completes his takeover." They spent the final hours before dawn making last-minute adjustments to their plan and confirming that all elements of their support network remained in position despite the accelerated timeline. The evidence would still be released at 9 o'clock Sunday morning, but now it would need to have immediate impact rather than building gradually over several days. Captain Rothwell would drive Adrian to within walking distance of the cathedral, where loyal guards would provide protection during his movement from the vehicle to the sanctuary. Once inside, church officials who had been contacted by Sarah would ensure that he had access to the pulpit during the traditional Sunday service that was broadcast live throughout the kingdom. "Remember," Sarah advised as they prepared for departure, "once you enter the cathedral, there's no retreat. Blackwood's forces will surround the building within minutes of your appearance, and your only protection will be the traditional sanctuary law and the presence of international media." Adrian nodded, understanding fully that he was embarking on a mission from which he might not return alive. But as he looked at the people who had risked everything to help him reclaim his birthright, he felt a calm certainty that this was the right course of action regardless of its personal consequences. "If something happens to me," he told them, "continue the operation. Marcus has all the evidence and Colonel Vasquez can coordinate with international allies to maintain pressure on Blackwood's government. The important thing is that the truth emerges and the people of Valdoria understand what has been done to them." Lord Fairfax clasped Adrian's hand with both of his own, his voice thick with emotion. "Your father would be proud of the king you've become in exile. Win or lose, you've proven yourself worthy of the crown." As they prepared to leave the hunting lodge for what might be the final phase of their struggle, Adrian took one last look at the place where his family had spent countless peaceful weekends, hunting and fishing and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together without the formality of court life. In a few hours, he would either be dead or restored to his throne, but either way, those peaceful days were gone forever. The sun was rising over the forests of his homeland as they began their journey toward destiny, carrying with them the hopes of everyone who believed that legitimate government was worth any sacrifice necessary to preserve it. The royal cathedral of St. Marcus stood like a monument to centuries of faith and tradition, its ancient stone walls having witnessed the coronations of 32 kings and the funeral services of their queens. As Adrian approached the massive oak doors through a morning mist that seemed almost ethereal in its timing, he could hear the opening hymn of the traditional Sunday service echoing from within, voices raised in songs that had been sung by his ancestors and would, if he succeeded, be sung by his descendants for generations to come. At exactly 9 o'clock, as congregants throughout the kingdom listened to the familiar ritual of morning worship, news outlets across Europe began publishing the evidence of Lord Chancellor Blackwood's conspiracy. Financial records showing payments to corrupt officials and documentary proof of the plot to eliminate the royal family flooded social media platforms, international news networks, and underground communication channels that Blackwood's government could not control or suppress. Inside the cathedral, Archbishop Williams was midway through his traditional opening blessing when he noticed a commotion near the main entrance. Security, composed of men loyal to religious authority rather than political power, had quietly cleared a path for the figure approaching the altar. The archbishop's voice faltered for just a moment as he recognized the face of his rightful sovereign, but centuries of church training and crisis management allowed him to continue the service without breaking its sacred rhythm. Adrian walked slowly down the central aisle, his footsteps echoing across stone floors where kings had walked to their coronations and queens had knelt to receive the blessings of their people. The congregation, composed of citizens from every level of Valdorian society who gathered each Sunday regardless of their political affiliations, began to recognize him despite weeks of official propaganda declaring him dead. A murmur rippled through the assembled worshippers, growing stronger as more people turned to see the man they had been told was a traitor and a fugitive walking calmly toward the altar where his family had been blessed for 5 centuries. Some rose from their seats in recognition and respect. Others remained seated, uncertain whether they were witnessing a miracle or a catastrophe. "Your Highness, Archbishop William said formally, his voice carrying clearly through the cathedral sound system and consequently to every broadcast receiver in the kingdom, "We welcome you to this house of God, where all souls find sanctuary." Adrian stopped before the altar and turned to face the congregation, his presence now being broadcast live to millions of citizens who had been told he was dead. Behind him, the magnificent stained glass windows cast colored light across his face, creating an almost otherworldly appearance that seemed to emphasize the historic significance of this moment. "Dalarai," he began, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable authority of legitimate rulership, "I stand before you today not as a prince in exile, but as your rightful king, returning to claim what has been stolen from our people through treachery and betrayal." Outside the cathedral, the sound of military vehicles could be heard approaching at high speed. Blackwood's forces were responding exactly as predicted, but they faced an impossible tactical situation. Any attempt to storm the cathedral during a live broadcast would confirm every accusation being made against them, while allowing Adrian to continue speaking would give him the platform to destroy their entire narrative of legitimacy. 3 weeks ago, evidence was discovered proving that Lord Chancellor Blackwood and his conspirators have been planning to overthrow our lawful government and seize power through lies, forgery, and murder, Adrian continued, his words reaching not only the congregation before him, but every household in the kingdom. "The evidence of their conspiracy is being released to international news outlets at this very moment, providing proof of crimes that demand justice." Inside the cathedral, the atmosphere was electric with tension and possibility. The citizens who had spent weeks wondering whether their government was telling them the truth about the royal family were finally hearing directly from their legitimate sovereign, and his words carried the ring of truth that had been absent from official statements. Archbishop William stood beside Adrian, his presence providing both religious sanctuary and implicit church endorsement of the rightful monarchy. The church's independence from political authority was enshrined in Valdorian law, making the cathedral one of the few places where Blackwood's forces could not simply arrest anyone who opposed them. Now present this evidence to any court or investigation that operates under legitimate authority, Adrian announced. "But first our father King Edmund must be freed from the captivity in which he is being held while conspirators forge documents of abdication that would make their coup appear legal." The military vehicles outside had stopped, and through the cathedral's windows, the congregation could see soldiers taking positions around the building, breaking inside. The legitimate king addressing his people under religious protection, outside the forces of a usurper who dared not attack but could not retreat. Sarah Morrison stood among the congregation, monitoring communications and coordinating with the network of loyal military officers who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Her encrypted device showed messages arriving from units across the kingdom as officers who had sworn oaths to the crown made the choice between supporting Blackwood's illegal government or defending their rightful sovereign. "Colonel Harris of the 3rd Infantry Regiment has declared for the crown," she whispered into her communication device. "Major Thompson of the Royal Artillery is moving his units to secure the main road to the castle." Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, no relation, reports that half of the 7th Armored Division is refusing orders from Defense Minister Cromwell. The military coup that Blackwood had orchestrated was beginning to fracture as professional soldiers remembered their true loyalty. The sight of their legitimate king, alive and addressing the nation from the sanctuary of the Royal Cathedral, was forcing every member of the armed forces to make an immediate choice that would define the rest of their careers and their honor. Inside the cathedral, Adrian continued his address, his words carrying the weight of authority that came from generations of legitimate rule. "I call upon every citizen of our kingdom to reject the illegal government that has been imposed upon you through lies and conspiracy. I call upon every soldier to remember the oath you swore to defend our Constitution and our crown, and I call upon every person who believes in justice to stand with us as we reclaim our heritage from those who would steal it." A communication device carried by one of Archbishop Williams's assistants began receiving urgent messages from church officials throughout the kingdom. Similar scenes were being repeated at cathedrals and churches across Valdoria as citizens gathered to hear their king's words, and local religious authorities provided sanctuary to those who declared their support for the legitimate monarchy. Outside, the standoff was intensifying as more military units arrived, but now they represented both sides of the conflict. Units loyal to Blackwood's government faced off against soldiers who had declared for King Adrian. creating a tense situation where any aggressive action could trigger a civil war that would destroy the kingdom regardless of who ultimately claimed victory. As Defense Minister Cromwell arrived to take personal command of the situation, his face showing the strain of a man who had gambled everything on Blackwood's conspiracy and now saw his plans crumbling in real time. He could order an assault on the cathedral, but doing so would make him responsible for attacking a sacred space during a live broadcast, an action that would unite the entire population against his government. "Order your forces to stand down," came a voice from behind the military cordon. General Patricia Hawthorne, the highest-ranking woman in the Valdorian military and a veteran of 30 years of distinguished service, walked through the government positions with the calm confidence of someone who had made an irreversible decision. "General Hawthorne," Cromwell said urgently, "you're under orders to assist in the arrest of the traitors inside that cathedral." "I recognize no authority from an illegitimate government," she replied clearly, her voice carrying to news cameras that were recording every moment of the confrontation. "His pair against the crown and order all military personnel to lay down their weapons and return to their barracks pending reorganization under legitimate command authority." The moment hung suspended like a held breath as dozens of soldiers faced the choice between following Cromwell's orders or recognizing General Hawthorne's superior rank and clear legal authority. One by one, weapons were lowered as professional military discipline asserted itself over political loyalty to conspirators. Inside the cathedral, Adrian concluded his address with words that would be remembered by historians as the moment when the Valdorian monarchy was restored through courage rather than force. "I return to you not seeking vengeance against those who betrayed us, but justice for all who suffered under their illegal rule. Let this day mark not the end of our trials, but the beginning of our renewal as a free people under legitimate government." The congregation erupted in sustained applause that echoed through the stone halls and was heard by millions of citizens watching the broadcast. Citizens who had spent weeks wondering whether their government was telling them the truth about their royal family were finally hearing directly from their legitimate sovereign, and his words carried the conviction of truth. As Adrian walked back down the central aisle, now accompanied by Archbishop Williams and surrounded by citizens who had chosen to stand with their rightful king, the massive cathedral doors opened to reveal a transformed scene outside. The military units that had arrived to arrest a fugitive were now providing honor guard for their sovereign, while the conspirators who had planned to seize permanent control of the kingdom found themselves facing arrest for treason. Lord Chancellor Blackwood himself arrived just as Adrian emerged from the cathedral, his face showing the desperation of a man whose carefully constructed plans had collapsed in a single morning. He was surrounded by the few guards who remained loyal to his cause, but they were vastly outnumbered by military units that had declared for the legitimate monarchy. "You're under arrest for high treason against the crown," Adrian declared, his words carrying the full authority of kingship restored. "You will be given a fair trial under the laws you have violated, something you denied to the citizens you imprisoned for supporting legitimate government." Blackwood's arrest was broadcast live as international observers and news crews documented the peaceful restoration of legitimate rule in Valdoria. No shots were fired, no blood was shed. The conspiracy collapsed under the weight of truth exposed and loyalty remembered. Within hours, King Edmund was freed from his forced captivity and reunited with his sons in the cathedral, where his family had worshipped for generations. Though weakened by weeks of forced sedation, his voice was strong as he formally confirmed Adrian's actions and appointed him as regent pending full recovery of royal health. Marcus returned from exile that evening, carrying the evidence that would ensure justice for all who had participated in the conspiracy while providing mercy for those who had been deceived or coerced into cooperation. The trials that followed would be conducted under traditional Valdorian law, with full rights of defense and appeal, demonstrating that legitimate government operated through justice rather than vengeance. In the years that followed, historians would debate whether the restoration of the Valdorian monarchy represented the end of an era or the beginning of a new age of constitutional monarchy that balanced traditional authority with modern accountability. What could not be debated was the courage shown by two brothers who risked everything to preserve the principle that legitimate government derives its authority from law and tradition rather than from force and deception. The royal exile had ended not with conquest, but with restoration, proving that truth and courage could triumph over conspiracy and betrayal when good people chose to stand together for principles greater than their individual safety. The crown had been saved not by armies or foreign intervention, but by citizens who remembered that some things were worth any sacrifice necessary to preserve them. The kingdom of Valdoria had emerged from its greatest crisis stronger and more united than before, with institutions tested by fire and found worthy of preservation. And in the royal cathedral where it all began, the ancient stones bore silent witness to the truth that legitimate authority, once lost, can be reclaimed by those with the courage to stand for justice, regardless of the personal cost.